Welcome to Speakeasy JS. This is the JavaScript meetup for mad science, hacking, and experiments. I'm Paul Frazee, standing in for Ross, and I will be your host this evening. So mad science is about pursuing your own interests and doing things for no other reason than because you can, following your curiosity and building things just because you can. There's lots of reasons, for instance, why you shouldn't build an OS in JavaScript, but you're just going to do it anyway if you want to. So today we're joined by our speaker, Jordan Eldridge. Eldredge, how do I say that right?
Eldridge.
Eldridge. And let me get your title up here.
Ooh, hey, it's real.
It's fancy, right? So Jordan is the creator of WebAmp, an in-browser recreation of the classic media player Winamp. And you all may or may not remember Winamp as the best piece of software that you don't use anymore. It was from an era when app skins were a thing. And speaking of, Jordan has also created the Winamp Skin Museum, which is an amazing catalog of all of those Winamp skins that I recommend everybody peruse to see all that awesome artwork. And so today, Jordan is going to be talking about the design behind, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the design behind the Winamp Skin Museum. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. So I'm excited to have him here with us today. So please give a warm welcome to Jordan Eldridge.
All right. Thank you very much for having me here, Paul, and for being willing to host in Frost's absence. And let me get to my my screen share here. If you want to switch over to my slides and let me know when that's ready, I can proceed.
There we go. I think we're good. Let me turn
All
off
right.
there so I'm not blocking you there. And
Cool,
there you
cool. So yeah, as Paul said, my name is Jordan Eldridge, and I was going to talk about this idea of design as an optimization problem, which was sort of a concept which fell out of this work I did on a project called the Winamp Skin Museum. Now, before any of that makes any sense to anybody, I thought I would go back a little bit and talk about the things that led up to this project, and that will also serve to give a little bit of an introduction to myself. So let's see here. So as Paul said, I had this side project called WebAmp. You can find it at webamp.org. Which is an in-browser recreation of the sort of classic MP3 player Winamp, which was sort of came out around the same time as Napster. And so it's, for many people, sort of synonymous with that sort of MP3 revolution. And so this project is something I've been working on for about 6 years now, on and off. And it's been just a fantastic like playground to learn all kinds of things about building websites, about building applications, everything from collision detection to splining to audio visualization and compilers, interpreters, binary file interpretation. There's been sort of all these different opportunities to learn about all different kinds of fun things. And out of it has spun a number of related projects. And one of those is what I was excited to talk about here today, which is the Winamp Skin Museum. So when I was working on this, I said that there's been a lot of interesting opportunities to play with different projects, but one of the most fun sort of spin-offs of this, or sort of sub-problems, has been these skins. So like Paul said, Winamp could be themed using these files called skins, which members of the community would build and distribute. You can see a few of them here on the screen. And one of the fun things about WebAmp is that it can actually render those. It will parse and render those in the browser accurately. And I've gone to sort of a maybe over-the-top degree in trying to recreate all the little edge cases, including some bugs that Winamp had. And in that pursuit, I went to go download a lot of these Winamp skins. And I started to notice that the sites that had hosted them, which were like circa early 2000s, were starting to fall offline. And I realized, like, hey, if I'm having trouble getting these today, in 5 more years, these things might not exist. And since they're not, things that any corporation created, these are just amateur pieces of art that people made and distributed for fun. There's sort of like a moment of internet history that might be lost. And so I reached out on Twitter to see if anyone would be interested in helping solve this problem. And I was connected up with the Internet Archive and Jason Scott at the Internet Archive specifically. And so together we collected and archived, at this point, it's up to about 70,000 of these Winamp skins. And honestly, this has been just like such a pleasure and a treat to be a part of this, very nerdy exercise of trying to, locate, collect. We have some scripts that use WebAmp to automate creating screenshots to keep them a little more accessible. And actually, the Internet Archive went as far as to integrating WebAmp into their website, so you can actually play with these in their archive. But then when I saw this interface for it, I started to get a little sad, and I started to think, I wonder if we could do better. I wonder what it would look like to reimagine a Winamp skin site in the year 2020 at the time. And so I did that. And this is what I call the Winamp Skin Museum. And it's really just a reimagining of what a Winamp skin site could be. And the design inspiration for it was this sort of adage about, performance is a feature. And taking advantage of the new performance that we have, can we build a new interface which is sort of better in a step function way? And so I launched it via Twitter, and that same day, 24 hours later, we had gotten, I think, like 30 million images served to about 50,000 people. We had been covered in websites like The Verge, Gizmodo, PC Gamer, front page of Hacker News. And so I was very thrilled, right? This is like, for a side project, that's super cool. But I started to reflect on the fact that, really websites like this, Winamp skin websites have existed for maybe 20 years. And, they weren't getting covered in that way. And even this exact same collection of content already existed on the Internet Archive, and it wasn't getting covered in the same way. And so I started to have some confidence that this new, user interface had really supplied a transformative interface that made the content available in a new way. And since I had approached this whole thing with this notion of performance as a feature, I really started to realize that there was really more to it than just that. And that it's not just performance is a feature in the sense of that we're used to thinking about it like, if you make search faster, then you can interact with it in a different way. Because I think that really is what performance is a feature means, right? It's that there is a certain threshold past which, once your feature is that fast, it unlocks a new way of interacting with that feature. That you can do different things with it because it's fast enough to empower that new feature. And while I had started with this notion of what if we just made everything really fast? I realized that this all actually bubbled up to a single notion of performance, which was not about technology at all, but was about optimizing for throughput to the user. And so I guess what do I mean by that? It's kind of a bit crazy, but let's see. So this is the website, and my goal was to deliver as much content as possible to the user as quickly as possible for as long as possible. And it was sort of this almost comical idea of just how do we max out getting the user as much Winamp nostalgia as possible from the moment that they click the link to the website to the moment that they leave. And this framing of it, the reason I'm excited to talk about it is this framing of it, one, turned out to be successful for this particular use case. But also, as an engineer who is often uncomfortable with design, it was really gratifying to to have a mode of working which freed me from the things that often make me stressed about design. So I often find myself sort of unsure about which way to go with design, and having this sort of North Star allowed me to move confidently forward. So the approach I took, right, was like maximizing throughput to the user. And so the design decisions that I came up with are not particularly clever, I don't think, or novel. But I think the interesting thing was that they freed me up to make progress and that they ended up being successful. So I'm just going to talk about some of the design decisions that went into it because I think they're a little bit interesting, and they sort of illustrate how the notion of design, visual design, product design, and engineering can all sort of collapse into a single problem space, which was the piece about this that I found so enjoyable. So from a visual design perspective, right, my goal was to give you as much content as possible. So I did the very obvious thing, right, which is I basically used the entire screen to show you the content. You can compare that to your memory of what I showed you of either the circa 2005 Winamp skin sites or even the Internet Archive. And so it's sort of a simple decision, right? But it really is like, okay, I feel confident now that this is the maximum that I can show, basically. And so there's, a little bit of like, okay, division, how do we pick the right size for the screenshots such that they fill up the screen? But it's a very simple decision. And once you do it, it sort of solves the whole visual design. And then there's the interaction design. So we've maxed out one dimension, the sort of, or I guess 2 dimensions, but now how do you make it as easy as possible for users to get more content, right? I wanted it to be user driven. I didn't want to sort of like show them a fast-paced video of all this stuff. And again, there's sort of a canonical solution to that now. We've arrived that infinite scroll is sort of the lowest friction way you can allow users to proceed at their own pace, but get the content with as little friction as possible. And so again, that's basically the interface. You just scroll through skins forever. And if you can sort of start to see my scroll bar over here, this is ostensibly a list of 70,000 images. Now here's where it starts to get like the optimization on the design front ends up calling on optimization on the engineering front. So obviously you can't put a div of 70,000 images into the DOM and expect it to be, for your browser not to fall over. So, there's the standard technique called windowing, where you render basically only, you compute which items would be visible on the screen and render only those images and maybe a few rows above and below. So that's, one, again, not novel, but interesting thing that came out of this. And then the other question is, well, this is a lot of images. I'm on a fast network connection, so that spoils it a little bit, but how do you actually deliver these images to the browser fast enough that you can really start to scroll pretty quickly and that it will keep up? And again, there's sort of a canonical solution to that, which is a CDN, or a content delivery network. And so by putting Cloudflare in front of our S3 bucket that holds these, we got 2 benefits. One, the images are now served from a server geographically nearby. And so, it's much easier for it to keep up. But also, this is a side project, and S3 is actually not that cheap if you're serving, 30 million images in a day. So, I think we're so lucky to live in this sort of golden age where there are so many companies who are providing services basically for free to individuals and especially to open source communities in exchange for sort of the marketing that provides for their business to business sales. So again, we combine this sort of windowing technique with a fast CDN, and we're able to get, we've sort of maxed out now another dimension. We've maxed out the X and Y, and we've maxed out the dimension of time, right? How do we show as much content as possible to users in the time that they're on the site by delivering that to them as fast as they can consume it, and lowering the friction getting to see it. And so that that covers those 2 dimensions, and I think that basically maxes out the sort of passive flow of this site, which is like I've shown up and I kind of want to just like bathe in all these images. But there's another flow that I also wanted to support, which is a more intent-driven flow. And so this is, there were a lot of people when I posted this who had comments like, "Oh my God, I found the skin that I had when I was, in college, and like first discovered that band that, was so important to me in my teens." And so I wanted to support people being able to find the items which would be the most contentful for them. So again, going back to this notion of I want to deliver as much nostalgia as quickly as possible, I was able to wrap in this feature as a way of solving for and optimizing for that that same end goal. And so, okay, I want to be able to let people find the things that are interesting to them. That's a little bit tricky, right? Because this is a visual medium, and I think how do you supply search for a medium which isn't text-based? So we have file names, and that helps a bit. But what we were actually able to discover is that the Winamp skins themselves are basically zip files. And so what we're able to do is pull apart those zip files, and inside most authors provided some kind of like README file. And by extracting the text from that README and sending it to our search index, we're able to provide basically a very good search index to allow people to find the thing that they're looking for. So we've done that, and now we have a good search index. But how do we make search fast, right? We've made the lowest possible friction for discovering new content. What's the lowest possible friction for search? So I think we all remember search experiences where you type in your input and then you click submit, and then you wait for the page to reload and you see your results. And we've moved beyond that. We had sort of autocomplete, and now I think we've arrived that we can actually do it fast enough that we can do search as you type. And so that's the experience I wanted. And again, going back to this sort of, how spoiled we are in this era with Cloudflare offering free CDN, there's another service that offers free search as a service, specifically to open source and to some smaller projects, called Algolia. And their search service, not only is it very fast, but similar to Cloudflare, they actually do that at the edge, meaning they resolve your search queries at a server geographically nearby to your user. So when I start to type in this search query here, it's actually going to resolve that search at a point of presence, nearby my home in the Bay Area. So if I start to type here Zelda, you can see that basically is instantaneous. And so we've now delivered sort of the lowest friction version of an intent-driven flow as well. And now, like, what is the most potent form of this nostalgia? Well, that's actually using the skin in, an actual player. And of course, there's a lot of friction involved in, not being on a Windows machine if you want to try it out. You need a VM, or you need to go to some other machine, or maybe you can't really do it at all. So here again, we're very lucky that this whole thing spun out of this original idea that, well, we have this in-browser version of WebAmp, which can render skins. And so if you click on a skin, we sort of bring that to the center and then fade it out and replace it with a working version of WebAmp, which has all the things you can. I'm sorry, my fingers are not behaving here, but you can go in and out of shade mode. You can adjust the EQ. You can play and get the visualizer. You can adjust the volume, select tracks and whatnot. So all of this to say, I think this project was incredibly enjoyable to me. The WebAmp project itself has been super interesting, and the things that came out of it have been interesting as well. But this idea of picking a metric which sort of flows from the user all the way through to your server and to your code, and being able to optimize all the way along that spectrum. As an engineer working on a side project without someone, who was interested in design, gave me a tremendous amount of confidence to move forward. And the fact that it ended up proving successful made me eager to share it with other people in case it's applicable to either your project or, in some small way to something you're working on. Or if you wanted to, find something, seek out something where you think that this would be applicable. So yeah, thank you for having me here today. And I'm happy to take questions either about WebAMP itself, about the Winamp Skin Museum, or I guess anything else that you wish to discuss.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great. So everybody that is watching, if you type your questions or anything you want to talk about in the chat, we have a little stream here. We can see everything you're saying, and we will happily answer your questions. But while we're waiting for that, I'll just respond and I'll ask you some questions of my own. So first of all, the performance part of this thing, it's sort of funny. I saw the Skin Museum through my own Twitter feed when you put it out, so it somehow managed to find its way to me. And I actually had that thought when I was using it, like, oh my gosh, this is really fast.
Oh, cool. That's really great to hear.
Yeah, I seriously spent some time thinking about that because, it is that big block of images, and I was really surprised by how quickly I could scroll through and get the images in. And I didn't even see some of the other cool things. Like I didn't try out the search. That's also super impressive. And the fact that the actual player spawns when you click on them, I don't think I realized that was interactive. So that's even cool.
Yeah, I think that was a surprise to me as well. I think when I first started working on this project, that sort of seemed like that was the big value proposition, right? It was like, oh, you can actually get to a working version where you can try it out, with as little friction as possible. And it was amazing to me how few people actually realized that even existed, and that the project seemed to, like you said, you came across it independent of any knowledge of me. That it was able to spread so widely, and people were so enthusiastic about it, even without that piece. That it was all these other design decisions that actually allowed it to be as successful as it was, because it really leaned heavily on the content, which is the thing you're here to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually really interesting to hear you talk about it and hear how explicit your thinking was about that. Because I think your thesis is totally right. That really, your goal was to get everybody all these skins, and you did it, as well as could be asked for. And I do think you're right. I think that turned into a kind of a step change in terms of the experience. Because if it was what the Internet Archives, not to speak ill, but you would miss it.
They have a different mandate. They have to support all different kinds of media. They're, obviously their initial focus is on preservation. But I think what was I going to say? Oh, I'm blank. But yeah, I think the fact that you can really just focus on the content and get everything else out of the way really does end up having a pretty powerful effect. Oh, I remember what I was going to say, which was, it was interesting to see the language that these various news outlets and people on Twitter and whatnot used to describe it, because there was so much talk about it in terms of drug use. There were a surprising number of people who described it as if you want to escape into this museum, if you want to, just be inundated, if you want to mainline this content. And I think it is kind of a testament to that same focus on performance, that it is it's overwhelming how much content you can actually get to people.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like you have performance in two dimensions. There's how quickly everything's loading, but then it's also kind of how quickly you're getting it to them.
Right.
Which is kind of a UI thing, a design thing.
Right. Let's see. I see a few questions here that maybe I can address. Let's see. Good tips for Cloudflare and Algolia. Any other tools that were helpful while building this? Yeah, actually, there's a really good one there, which is and actually one thing that I totally forgot to talk about, which is so there was actually one more dimension that I was able to optimize, and this is like going to be a little bit of a medium-sized walk to answer your question, which was okay. You optimize the x and the y. You optimize time for density. There's actually one more dimension which I hadn't realized existed, which was not all Winamp skins are equal in their like nostalgia value. And so how do you optimize in that dimension? And so I sort of think it's like density, right? Like you have the dimension of space and time, and then it's like dimension of density, like how much is there in each pixel? And the solution we ended up coming up with is we have a Twitter bot, which at Winamp skins, which tweets out a skin every like 2 hours, and it's at this point it's tweeted out several thousand skins. And so what we did is we reverse scraped the likes and retweets from that bot and used that as our sorting metric. So we get this notion of density, and like the skins which are most resonant with a modern audience as well. And I totally forgot to include that in this talk. But to your question about other tools that were helpful, the way that the Twitter bot works is there's an initial review step, because one thing that you may not realize is that there were an awful lot of Winamp skins which were not particularly safe for work for various reasons. And so we couldn't just like sort of blindly tweet them out. And in addition, there's sort of a pretty wide spread of like quality. And so we wanted to ensure that we were giving the better ones rather than the shittier ones. And so what we did was we built a Discord bot where you could prompt it to show you a screenshot, and then you could react to it with emoji. And actually, Luigi Han, who's here in chat, has been instrumental in helping to review skins in our Discord server. In addition to, even more importantly, having authored a surprising number of the skins back in the day that now live on the front page due to their continued resonance. So a huge shout out to Luigi Han for being a really great, important piece of this project.
So was that like a kind of accelerated manual review process that you did through Discord?
Exactly. So we started with doing it in Discord, and then we eventually ended up building a web interface, so it was like basically modeled on Tinder. So that we could review skins as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Let's see, one question that just came up. I see Winamp visualizations. So you can't see Winamp visualizations in the Winamp Skin Museum, but if you go to webamp.org, you can see Winamp visualizations in the browser. And that I cannot take full credit for. That is a project run by a guy named Jordan Berg, who is also in chat, actually, and then he helped us to integrate that into WebAmp. And there's an exciting project we're working on there where we're trying to get those presets to run rather than in JavaScript in WebAssembly. So that's like another exciting, place where this WebAmp project, which has sort of spun out into all these other interesting sub-projects.
So there's another question in the chat that is about how you're getting performance and why you made some of the decisions you did. And one of them asking, you used absolute positioning on all your thumbnails. Was there any particular reason you chose to do it that way? Yeah, I think that comes down to this notion of windowing that I mentioned in the talk, about if you want to sort of lie to your user and say, oh yeah, this is totally like 70,000 images in one giant div. The windowing technique has sort of, I think people who maintain the different windowing libraries, I'm using one by Brian, and I can't think of his last name, but on the React team. I think it's called like React Window or something like that. But I think they've sort of discovered that it's a very performance sensitive
piece because it has to be smooth. And I think they've discovered that for whatever reason, and I don't have the full answer to it, the most performance, like the best performance can be got by doing the absolute positioning. But again, that's not a decision I personally made outside of the React library I choose to do the windowing.
Yeah. So I think we have, if I remember correctly, about 5 more minutes. And unless you have something you want to talk about, I was going to ask how WebAmp itself is built. We were talking about this a little before the stream. Is it a transpile of the original, or how did you put together the original WebAmp?
Yeah, so the original inspiration for WebAmp was I was at work. I was working on like improving our sprite sheets. We were doing, I think it's like another actually performance optimization pattern, where if you have a very large number of small images, this can start to clog the total number of HTTP requests that your browser can make at any given time. This is less true now. If you look at the WinAmp Skin Museum, obviously it's making a lot of HTTP requests in parallel. But the solution would be that instead of shipping, 30 icons or 50 icons, you would ship a single image that had those icons in it in like a grid. And then you would use CSS to position that as like the background image behind something. And then you would sort of use like background offset or like top and left or whatever. I don't remember exactly what it is, but to like position it within your div. And so you would have only one image downloaded. It'd be a larger image, but you would actually have some advantages there. And so the like aha moment I had was like, oh my God, I remember that WinAmp skins also used this technique of sprite sheets. I think it comes from video games predating any of those things. And so I was like, oh man, could I render the WinAmp UI using those original assets in the browser? And when I was able to, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I just sort of started, going more and more and more and sort of pursuing the parity with the user interface. And so it's just a React app. It uses Redux and React. And the sort of magic of the skins works by it's like downloads the skin file, which is basically a zip. It uses an npm library called JSZip to extract that into its constituent files. And then it takes those images, sticks them into a canvas to slice out the individual like sprites, and then builds up a giant CSS sprite sheet or CSS style sheet to saying like, okay, for a div with this name, use this background. For a div with this name, use this background. And actually, just a question here in chat, is it available on GitHub? Yes, it is. If you go to webamp.org, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's like a GitHub icon, and it's open source. And you can actually, it's also published as a NPM library. So if you want to include it on your website, feel free.
That's awesome. Got that up on the screen there. So what about the visualizations?
Yeah, so like I said, this was Jordan Berg's project. Again, he's in chat, JNBerg16. And yeah, this was an amazing project to get these Milk Drop, which was the like famous plugin that did these visualizations working in the browser. He had put in a amount of work basically equal to what WebAmp was to do this before we even had met. And it works by compiling, like doing a ahead of time compile of the shader code that these presets had into WebGL, and then compiling this special language called EEL, which users would write these presets in to JavaScript. So I guess I should clarify here that there's the Milk Drop WebAmp plugin, or WinAmp plugin, I should say, and then users could write these presets, which were basically like equations and whatnot that would give all these different, interesting visualizations. And so what Jordan wrote was this runtime, which would implement what Milk Drop did, but then also this compiler like pipeline that would take these preset files with this shader code and this EEL code and convert it into the browser version, right? JavaScript and WebGL. And the piece that we're working on now is being able to convert that EEL code, not the shader code, but the EEL code into WebAssembly in the browser when you load a preset we'll compile that to a WebAssembly module and start executing it. We haven't shipped it yet, but we have some really impressive benchmarks showing that this is like a massive speed up and also giving us some performance guarantee or some security guarantees.
Very cool. Well, I am super impressed with the amount of cleverness you've applied to all of these different pieces. I found this really interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing it. You got to try to get, when you get your new visualizer code out, try to hit viral just as well.
Yeah, I don't know if the I did a dorky thing in WebAssembly audience is as big as I am nostalgic about Winamp audience, but we'll try.
The right crowds, I think, maybe and WebAssembly that might do it. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jordan, for joining us today. And so now I am going to take us to our sort of post-talk socializing bit. Let me get this up on screen here.